North Carolina State University. Additional funding is provided by the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, presenting TarHeelGardening.com, your online gardening resource for North Carolina plants, professional advice, and more. And by Appalachian Naturescapes, custom landscape designs specializing in Blue Ridge native landscape themes. From intimate gardens to elaborate outdoor living spaces. AppalachianNaturescapes.com.
Coming up, a southern staple with an urban flair. In the Garden heads to Atlanta, Georgia. Next. Hi, welcome to In the Garden. I'm Bryce Lane at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, located in the heart of Midtown Atlanta. Listed as one of the top attractions in Atlanta, this garden offers the perfect break from the bustle of big city living. It's often described as an urban oasis. This is Mary Pat Matheson, the Executive Director of the Atlanta Botanical Garden. And folks, the Atlanta Botanical Garden should be high on your priority list if you visit the greater Atlanta area. Mary Pat, tell us about this garden.
Welcome, first of all. It's great
you.
to have you here
Thank
today.
you.
Beautiful, cool morning for a change. This is really an oasis in the city of Atlanta. It's a 30-acre garden right in the heart of the city. Beautiful trees, obviously, and a wonderful plant collections, very diverse plant collections from Asia to native species to actually the largest collection of species orchids in the United States.
That's fantastic.
So there's so much to see here, and on top of that, there's a lot to do as well.
Well, tell us about how old is the garden?
You know, I look at it as a young adolescent. We are about 30 years old. So by botanical garden standards, especially if you compare us to Europe, that's a young pup.
Right, yeah.
But we've done a lot. We've grown a lot, particularly in the last 10 years. So when you see the garden, it's a mature garden.
Right.
But in terms of the long-term vision, it's still a young adolescent.
Well, take us through the garden. If I were coming to visit and I was coming into the garden, what are some of the unique areas that you have for people to see?
Well, that's the wonderful thing. There's so many things to see here, but you come in through a beautiful new visitor center, and we have one of the greenest parking facilities in the country. And I only talk about that because it's important these days to hide our cars and use plants to shroud parking decks. So we're proud of that project. But you come into a woodland garden after you leave the visitor center that we call the Southern Seasons Garden because it's really a showcase, a celebration of all of the different plants you can grow in the South that bloom every month. So there's something in bloom in the Southern Seasons Garden from the beginning of January all the way through the end of December. And of course, right now the hydrangeas are just finishing up and they have beautiful seed heads on them. And I don't know what's my favorite season in the Southern Seasons Garden. I would probably say June and July with the hydrangeas. But in the spring when the ephemerals come out and the trilliums are in bloom, it's just a beautiful place to be and shady. And so that's the entry to the garden. But we pride ourselves on our woodlands because the city of Atlanta has lost a lot of its forests and its woodlands. And we have one of the largest intact deciduous woodlands left in the community, and it's about 15 acres called Stores of Woods. And we wanted, years ago when we were trying to figure out how to get our guests into the woods, we wanted to do it in a really dramatic way, so we built a canopy walk.
Fantastic.
And you walk about 40 feet in the canopy up in the air. So I think visually as you leave the woods, now you walk into the sunnier part of the garden. And of course we have a beautiful parterre garden, which changes every season, wonderful annual plant collections and displays. And a rose garden is really very interesting. A number of years ago we thought about roses are one of the most favorite plants of people, but they're the least sustainable as we look at what can we do better with our plants. Roses are a group we really wanted to look at, so we changed the rose garden to mostly species roses and old-fashioned roses and roses that are tougher than the norm, than the floribundas and grandifloras, and it's 100% organic. So we're not fertilizing, pesticides, none of that.
So your visitors really do learn that they can grow roses without all that intense gardening.
Exactly, and maybe that's the future of gardening. We've got to be
Sure.
careful with what we're putting into the ground these days, and I think it's a beautiful rose garden. I hope you would enjoy it as well. And then finishing up with the outdoors, the other place that I think everyone has to see is the edible garden. And we're also interested in food these days, and where does our food come from? So we conceived of an idea to do an edible garden that is a combination of herbs and vegetables and fruits all together, and do it in a dramatic and beautiful way that's kind of urban chic, because we are in the city. And one of its features that I think is really wonderful is a 50-foot long vertical wall of herbs. So it's showing people how you can grow gardens vertically, not just the way that we traditionally grow them. And it doesn't matter what season you come to the edible garden, there's something always in bloom and fruit. And I love to just stand there and listen to people go, oh my gosh, is that really asparagus? They don't know what it looks like.
Exactly.
We don't know where our food comes from.
Yeah. I thought the espalier along the fence too is a really unique and interesting approach.
Isn't that great? We did these espaliers, you've seen them, of apples and pears. And we like to integrate art into our gardens, because I think art and gardens and sculpture and gardens just are so beautiful together. And one of the things you'll notice are the glass apples, and we wanted to hang those on the espalier because there are going to be days when there will be no apples on the espaliers. And visitors really get that, and it slows you down. It makes you stop and go, what really is that I'm looking at?
That's right.
And then after you leave the edible garden, of course, you want to spend a lot of time in the conservatories, because there's the immersion experience in the tropical rainforest, where you could be in Costa Rica or Ecuador, or pick whatever rainforest in the world you most want to go to. And we have live animals. We have birds and some of our dart frogs that are part of our frog collection. And then from there you can go into the Orchid Center and just see the most dreamy, beautiful orchids you've ever seen in your life.
Well, that sounds fantastic.
It's a full day.
Yes. Oh no, it sounds like more than a full day for us plant geeks. But and I know you've got some other garden areas around there. But Mary Pat, thank you so much for getting us, oriented and ready to go and visit this garden.
Oh, happy to have you here. Enjoy every square inch. It's a beautiful garden.
The Atlanta Botanical Garden has an award-winning children's garden. It's 2 acres large, and it's a wonderful place for kids to go. Great plants, winding paths. They have an amphitheater, a vegetable garden, water elements, and playground equipment all incorporated into a garden. Boy, to watch the kids run through here, they really have a great time. Be sure to check out the children's garden when you come here to the Atlanta Botanical Garden. Now, if you're gardening with children in mind, there are 3 basic factors you need to consider when you're putting your garden together. The first factor is you need to think about what kids see at their level. Think about eye level, and then choose your plants and your elements in the garden to facilitate that eye level. Don't think at an adult level, because then kids won't see what you see. We need to get down low and see. So take a look at this bed right here. Here's a bed that was designed for kids' eye level. Things only grow about 12 to 18 inches tall, and as they walk by, they can look right at them. So that's one aspect, and you need to think about that. The second aspect is what I call big, bold, and beautiful. You need plants that get kids' attention. And these are plants that have big, bold, and beautiful qualities about them. Either color of the foliage, or flowers, or even fragrance of something that they can touch and feel. This is a place where you want kids to get involved in the plant. Take, for instance, this white lantana here. Maybe not the biggest, boldest flower that you might find, but if you take a leaf, crush it, and you smell it, it's got a very aromatic quality about it. Of course, you want to go through a children's garden with the children so they'll understand not to eat the leaf. It's not poisonous, but it just doesn't need to be eaten. Okay, take a look at these coleus. Big, beautiful, colorful leaves, autumn colors with the yellow and the purple there, and then right next to it, this large foliage plant with the burgundy colored leaves. So that's big and bold in the leaf type there. Now, if you look over here, you can see Alyssum parviflorum. Alyssum parviflorum is a good evergreen shrub. Pull off a leaf, crush that leaf, smells just like licorice. How exciting for a child to take that leaf and smell it. It smells like candy, so you can show them that aspect of that plant. Then if you look over here, See, you've got a number of different grasses that have these seed heads. This is sea oats with the seed heads that form after it flowers. They hang down, they move in the breeze, make a little noise, and they're interesting tactile touch. You want the kids' hands to be involved in touching things and feeling things to get close to nature. And then down in front of that is juncus. Juncus is a great ornamental grass with bluish leaves, has an interesting textural quality about it as well. Now, what about trees? Can we include some trees in our children's garden that would be unique? Well, one of my favorites is Cercidophyllum japonicum, the Japanese katsura tree. Here's a tree that'll grow about 40 feet tall. It has heart-shaped leaves with red petioles. But folks, it develops a beautiful, beautiful orange to yellow fall color. But when the fall color comes, the fragrance smells just like cotton candy. It's just incredible. What child wouldn't want to go through a garden that smells like cotton candy? And lastly, what you want to do is create a garden that has curvilinear paths. You want to wear those kids out when in the garden, and you want them to feel like they're drawn through it. And to do that, you put lots of paths in that go to different spaces, and the Atlanta Botanical Garden does a great job with creating little garden spaces with paths that stem off from the main path. If you do those three things, your children will learn a lot in the garden. They'll have a great time, and at the end of the day, they'll be worn out. And that's what we love, is worn out kids at the end of the day. Folks, think about these things when you garden for kids in your own home garden. Whenever I visit public gardens, I always like to put a list together of really cool plants that I see in those gardens that I want to add to my own home landscape. I thought I'd share with you my list while I'm here at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. Here's a colocasia. It's called Colocasia teacup, and it's really known for its very unusual leaf. Folks, take a look at this leaf. It's somewhat folded and appears like a teacup. In fact, if you look, I'm going to lean that over. There's a little bit of water left from the rain the night before, right in that teacup. We'll combine that dark green leaf with a burgundy colored stem, and you've got a unique and interesting colocasia to add to your collection. You can grow it in containers, you can grow it in a mixed border like you see here, and it'll even grow in standing water like a water garden or a fountain or a pool. It's a great addition to your garden because of the unique and interesting leaves. Great conversation piece. It's on my list. You should put it on yours. Well, here's another plant that you'll see in conservatories, and you can grow it as a house plant. This is an alocasia, Alocasia michaelitziana friedeck, the friedeck elephant ear. Now, a lot of alocasias come from tropical regions, so they won't overwinter in our gardens. But just take a look at the leaf. It's a large arrowhead-shaped leaf with deep, rich green leaf tissue and a white mid-vein with veins coming out. It really pops. Now, folks, if you grow this as a houseplant, you can grow it in an east window, even a northeast window, because it'll tolerate that low light intensity. The leaves will be a little bit smaller. But why not use it as an annual out in a shade garden? With the white veins popping through that dark green, it'll really add to your home landscape. So consider using this friedeck alocasia as a plant for your shade garden outdoors. This is Fatshedra leesii angiostar, the angiostar Fatshedra. Now, Fatshedra is a very unique genus. It's actually a hybrid genus. They crossed Fatsia with Heterohelix and got this very unique evergreen shrub vine plant called Fatshedra. Now, leesii angiostar was selected because of its unique and interesting evergreen leaves that are variegated. You see that cream-colored margin along the leaf and that deep, rich, dark green color on the inside. It really pops. Now, here's a plant that you can actually train on a trellis as a vine, but it also grows as a shrub. The unique thing you need to do is cut those growing tips back, and that'll stimulate more growth from down below. Now, this plant will tolerate shade, but it'll also tolerate morning sun or afternoon sun. About a half a day's worth of sun help it grow really well. Well-drained soil, use it in a shade garden, naturalized garden, or even in a mixed border, or train it on a wall or a trellis. It's a great plant. Fatshedra has a lot of unique and interesting cultivars. This one was selected from a town in Japan called Angyo, henceforth the name Angiostar, by a South Carolina nurseryman by the name of Ted Stevens. Great plant for your garden. Select it, get it in there and watch it grow. Well, for breakfast this morning, I had the best Greek yogurt. It was pomegranate flavor. That's right, pomegranates can grow in your gardens in North Carolina. They're large red fruit with the seeds surrounded by that gelatinous material that gives you that great juice. Well, you know, an edible landscape could have pomegranates. And look at this pomegranate. This is Punica granatum purple sunset. And it's a pomegranate that has a deep, rich, purple-colored fruit. You can see the purple clusters of fruit growing, and they have edible seeds in there that have that gelatinous material around it too, so you can still harvest these. So here's an edible ornamental. Now this plant's a dwarf pomegranate. It still produces the orange flowers, and you can see these orange flowers right here. Lots of dwarf pomegranates. The large trees might be too large to grow in a small home landscape, but the dwarf pomegranates really will work well. And Purple Sunset is dwarf, and there are other dwarf cultivars that you should look for. Still covered with those orange flowers, and then the fruit. Now the dwarf fruit will be a little bit smaller, and as you can see here on the purple one, they're smaller than your typical pomegranate that you'd buy in a store. Full sun, well-drained soil. Here you can see it being used in a container, and you can also coordinate this plant with other purple leaf plants. Here at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, they're using it with a basil. Now this is pretty cool basil. This is called Thai holy basil, and if you look at the leaves, they're a deep, rich purple color. As the new leaves come out, they start out green and develop a purple coloration around the edges, and then turn that bright purple in full sun. Put that in a container, put it next to the Purple Sunset pomegranate, and you've got a great combination for the home garden. Better yet, use both of these plants in a mixed border, and you can enhance your landscape with these purple colors. Well, everybody loves orchids, and when you visit a botanical garden like this, you've got to see the orchids. Becky, you've got an incredible orchid collection here. Tell us about where they come from and how they grow.
Oh, well, we've had an orchid collection here since the garden began. Our collection has grown over the years. We built the conservatory in 1989, and our collection had grown to the point where we knew we needed a larger space just for the display of orchids.
Wow.
There are orchids from all over the world. Orchids occur in the tropics and also in Georgia. Most occur in the tropics as epiphytes, and the ones in Georgia grow, for the most part, in the ground.
We'll talk about epiphytes now. I know what epiphytes are and how they grow, but their roots actually don't grow in soil, per se. Right?
That's right. They live up in the trees. In the tropics, most orchids are epiphytes, and they live in trees mainly to get away from competition for light that would occur if they lived on the ground.
Right. Now, how do you mimic that environment in your media and your substrate here for the orchids that you grow?
That's a great question. We have done everything that we can to make them happy by getting our epiphytic orchids up off the ground. We attach them to trees where they're happy growing. We've got some growing on the cedar pergola, all sorts of substrates that are up off the ground. And of course, the orchids that are terrestrials we plant in the ground.
Now, the Fuqua Orchid Center is split up into a couple of different regions or zones, is that right?
That's right. There are different areas devoted to orchids from different geographical areas in the world. Orchids of Mexico, orchids of Asia. We even have a tropical high elevation house for growing orchids from the mountains in tropical areas.
Now, how many different species of orchids do you have in this collection?
We have about 2,000 different species.
Wow. Wow. Now, are you doing anything with propagation in order to increase or to conserve those plants?
We are. We have a tissue culture lab. We are one of the few botanical gardens that has a lab for propagating orchids and other rare plants. So we make great use of that.
So if I'm a home gardener and I've got an orchid and it's the middle of the summertime, is there anything I need to be doing?
Oh, there's lots. It's important not to forget about your orchids in summer. It's time to cut the spike back if your orchid has finished flowering. It's also a great time to repot lots of orchids. The best time to repot an orchid is when the new shoot is growing from the base of the plant. So now's a great time for lots of orchids to be repotted.
Well, now, if I wasn't an orchid grower, if I wasn't a home gardener that had an orchid at home and I wanted to try one, is there one specific type that might work? I mean, you see these Phalaenopsis, is that where to go? Or?
They're beautiful, they're tried and true, and they are a good choice for people to grow at home on the windowsill. Yeah, but there are others now becoming available.
Now, how long does it take from when they flower to when they'll flower again?
Most orchids flower at the same time every year.
Okay. So once a year then.
Once a year.
So we need to be patient, but I know orchid flowers last a long time.
Oh yeah, for example, the Phalaenopsis will last a couple of months.
Wow, okay, all right. And then, okay, so is there any kind of special trick to growing orchids as far as light intensity, or?
Different ones require different light intensity, so it's important to choose the right one for your conditions. For example, the Phalaenopsis behind us would like an east window, right up in the windowsill.
Kind of early morning, that morning sun.
sun,
Right.
yeah.
Well, Becky, thanks for that information about orchids, and we look forward to looking through the Fuqua Orchid Center and catching all those really cool plants. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
And folks, remember, don't be afraid to grow orchids as a houseplant. I know a lot of times people get a little bit nervous about it, but if you do your homework, select the right plant for the light environment that you've got, you too can grow an orchid, just like you might see here at the Atlanta Botanical Garden. I've been blessed to travel all over the world and visit public gardens. And it seems no matter where I go, there's always an NC State connection. Either someone works there that graduated from our program in horticultural science, or a plant that was introduced by NC State Horticulture is planted there for display. It's really quite amazing. Take, for instance, this tree. This is Styrax japonicus emerald pagoda. The late J.C. Ralston went on a plant collecting trip to Korea and in the Seoksan region found a tree that had everything bigger than the typical Styrax. An upright tree that grows about 20 to 25 feet, beautiful dark green leaves about twice the size of a typical Styrax, and giant flowers 2 to 3 times bigger than the typical flowers, and very fragrant. Not only that, but had a wonderful vase-shaped habit with smooth and muscular bark. Well, JC collected cuttings, brought them home, planted them, rooted them, and introduced a new cultivar of Styrax. The only problem was he didn't really want to use the Seoksan name as a cultivar name, and he was having trouble coming up with another name. With the help of faculty in the Department of Horticultural Science, he came up with Styrax japonicus emerald pagoda to try to be descriptive of that plant and introduce the emerald pagoda Styrax to the nursery industry. This is another plant that came out of NC State Horticulture, Viburnum awabuki chindo, the Chindo viburnum. And once again, J.C. Ralston was traveling in Korea, and on an island off the coast, Chindo Island, he discovered this evergreen viburnum. Now let's take a look at the plant. It's a beautiful hedge screening plant. It'll grow about 20 feet tall, kind of an oval shape to oblong shape, and if you look at the leaves, you can see they're thick, dark green leaves that are evergreen and make for a great visual screen. Plant 3 to 5 of these together and you can't even see through them. It's a great plant for the home landscape. In addition, once these plants become established and mature, they produce clusters of white flowers in the spring that turn into bright red fruit in the fall. Now, you've got to be patient with the fruit because it does take this plant a few years to become established and mature. But folks, it makes a great hedge plant, makes a good screening, good architectural uses in the landscape. It's a great plant right out of NC State, Viburnum awabuki chindo. NC State Horticulture has a great ornamentals breeding program, and it may have all gotten started back in the 1980s at the NC State University Arboretum, where J.C. Ralston not only collected plants from all over the world, but crossed plants, even common plants like Calycanthus floridus, the sweet Betsy shrub that most of us had growing in our yards or our grandmothers had in their yards, with the small little burgundy-colored flowers that smell like apple cider. Well, he crossed that plant with an Asian version of the shrub called Calycanthus sinensis, collected seeds and then selected out seedlings of the plant that hopefully had flowers that resembled both but put together. Now, the Chinese Calycanthus has a large white flower with a yellow center and no fragrance. Well, sure enough, they select that out of plant, a large deciduous shrub that has large burgundy colored flowers with a slight cinnamon scent. That's Calycanthus ralstonii, Hartledge wine, the Hartledge wine, or Ralston allspice. And here's the shrub right here in the Atlanta Botanical Garden. It's a shrub that'll grow 8 to 10 feet, and folks, be careful. This is so vigorous, it'll grow in any kind of soil, and we're learning that it'll grow 12 to 20 feet tall. So it does require some pruning. But it produces those flowers in mid to late April and early May, quite beautiful, covered, and then sporadically throughout the summer. The leaves are huge, as big as my hand, opposite arranged, and up and down the stem. And so with the right kind of pruning, you can use this shrub in a mixed border, full sun. It'll grow in just about any kind of soil, and you'll be able to appreciate the Ralston allspice that came right out of NC State. Our plant of the week is Bouvardia ternifolia firecracker bush, also called hummingbird plant. Now folks, remember, send in your suggestions for a plant of the week to our website or our Facebook page, and if we use it on the show, we'll send you an In the Garden t-shirt. Now, Bouvardia ternifolia firecracker bush is a great herbaceous perennial that's native in the southwest region of the United States. Well, that tells us a couple of things. One, it likes full sun, and two, it'll tolerate drought. It grows very well in North Carolina in bright, sunny locations. It's a great plant for a mixed border or herbaceous perennial border. Now let's take a look at the plant. Upright growth. The stems grow upright, maybe 2 to 3 feet tall. Sometimes a little bit of a tendency to flop, so you might want to prune it a couple of times in the early spring to keep it down. But then when it starts to flower in midsummer, they're absolutely stunning. Clusters of red tubular flowers at the ends of the branches just create a real wild looking kind of plant. Not only that, but hummingbirds love this plant, and if you look closely at the flower, you can see why. This long tubular flower with plenty of nectar down inside, and so the hummingbirds will come and visit this flower. It's actually better than a hummingbird feeder. Put this together with a number of other plants, yellows and other hot colors, and you've got a great summer garden. Now, Bouvardia ternifolia. Ternifolia is the specific epithet for this species, and it gets that name if you take a look at the foliage. There are 3 leaves at every node, and ternate is the term we use to describe 3 leaves at every node, and that's where it gets that name ternifolia. Just adds to the unique aspect of this great plant of the week, Bouvardia ternifolia firecracker bush, also known as hummingbird plant. Well folks, that's all the time we have for this week. We had a great time here at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, and until next time, I'll look for you in the garden.
To register for In the Garden, the course, call NC State's Distance Education Program at 1-866-GO-STATE. That's 1-866-467-8283, or log on to distance.ncsu.edu. For more information about the program or to suggest a plant of the week, go to unctv.org/inthegarden.
Funding for In the Garden is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV. And by North Carolina State University. Additional funding is provided by the North Carolina Nursery and Landscape Association and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, presenting TarHeelGardening.com, your online gardening resource for North Carolina plants, professional advice, and more. And by Appalachian Naturescapes, custom landscape designs specializing in Blue Ridge native landscape themes. From intimate gardens to elaborate outdoor living spaces. AppalachianNaturescapes.com.